Okay, we are live again as we do. I am just doing my normal routines and then we will explain what's going on the screen right now. Although I think it's probably pretty self-explanatory, I'm about to do a shameless self-plug. It's shameless because I have no shame. Was raised Catholic, did have a healthy dose of Catholic shame. I gave it up for Lent, never looked back. My morning beverage, because sometimes I just don't want the coffee. Pop you open. We got a lot of stuff going on there. Do. Strategies and secondaries. And I will explain, like I said, everything in just a minute. Twitch.tv/. Oh yeah. I got a little dog hair from my little dog hanging out on my microphone. I can see it flapping when I talk, and I don't like what's going on here. There we go. We got there. Okay. Yeah, like I said, I gave it up for Lent. I never looked back. Honestly, my time in the military, and I was never overly religious, but my time in the military really changed my perspective and worldview quite a bit in a lot of ways. Um, so I was going to do cardboard terrain. I didn't get as much time to prep for that as I had liked. Obviously, the kids have been on Christmas break. Today was the daughter's first day back of school. Tomorrow is the son's first day back of school. So I didn't get as much prep time as I would have wanted, which is fine, but that's why we're not doing the cardboard terrain today. We will probably do that next Tuesday. I'll make sure, because I'll need to draw it out. It's not something that I can just go, or I might even just show you how I would draw it out, because I'll probably draw it out on the computer anyway, and then print the papers out and use it as a stencil. So that may be what we do. But before we get it started, I wanted to just share, because this does go on my YouTube channel also. So we're going to do some shameless self-advertising, as I said. I do have a Teespring store. We got some pretty cool theme shirts. I've got a Space Marine player out there, Frank. So, and I believe you have some Dark Angels. So, it's like 40k, but with trading wheels. A lot of it is just some lighthearted joking, some silliness. If you're an Ultramarines player, we got one for you too. There's no armor like plot armor. For you guard players, I can. That's fine. We will do that. Maximizing mediocrity since the 31st millennium. And then we're just going to look at I got some stickers, coffee cups, and I need to expand some of these. And I need to get some of these for me. I've got a couple of them, but I definitely need to get more. Because I really want this one right here. And I do have it in zip-up hoodie form. All my homies love Xenos. And now, hats. That was the big request. Can we get hats? Everybody wants my hat. Everybody sees my hat and they're like, holy cow, can I get one? These are not the same as the hat that I wear on the regular. The hat that I wear is a fitted, it's a flex fit. Those are special order. I have to get those from a specific distributor. But these are regular hats and snapbacks and beanies. So, boop, boop, boop. And then for the Blood Angels players out there, I've got balls of steel. So, again, just wanted to kind of throw that out there. As I said, this does go up on YouTube, so I wanted to make sure the YouTube audience gets to see this as well. We'll go ahead and put a link in the chat, and then we'll paste it or pin it as the manually unpinned or end of stream. Bam. All right, so it is now pinned. I think I just pinned the wrong thing. There we go. There it is. Okay, we got there. Took a while, but we got there. All right. So let's take a look at some secondaries. I have with me right here a copy of the GW layout for a table, right? Where is the markup in here? Can we do that? I know there's a markup. Color block, browser source text, image, slideshow. I gotta find it. If I don't have it, it's not the end of the world. We can still make this work, right? Alert box, themes, app store. Let's check that. Maybe that's in here. Draw. Annotate draw. Free, I don't know what that means. Free with Ultra. Oh, so not free. Gotcha. Okay. Like I said, I'm going to take a minute or two. If I don't find it, we'll work ahead without it. And actually, I can still do it. It's just kind of a pain in the butt. I can just open this up with Paint, actually. We'll just do that anyway. Bam. We'll just open this up with Paint, and then I'll be able to write and draw on it. Actually, it'll be GIMP. For those that don't know, GIMP is just a free open source version of like Photoshop. And I use it for a lot. I use it for doing my t-shirts and stuff. Boop. File. Open. Downloads. There we go. GW. Yep, there we go. Open. All right, there we go. So now we've got the board, right? So we can add a layer so that I can start writing on stuff. Objectives. Now, if we assume that this is, unless there's a mission that one of you wants to talk about, I'm just going to grab random missions and we're going to do a rough markup on them. So we'll start with abandoned sanctuaries because that's everybody's favorite, unless again somebody has a different request. So abandoned sanctuaries. Can you guys see that? Frank, can you see that? Anybody? Bueller? Boop. All right. I'm guessing that's a, yeah, okay, cool, cool, cool. Ish. That's what I was afraid of. Oh. How about that? I bet that looks a lot better. All right, so if we put one there, we know the other one's roughly here. The other one's roughly here. We don't need these to be exact. We just need to get a general representation of the board, right? So this is roughly what abandoned sanctuaries looks like. Now we know, and I know that some of these are probably going to change, right? But a lot of them are probably going to at least stay the same or have minor tweaks and changes because that's generally been the MO for uh, GW. You know, the mantra has basically been for the secondaries, especially small incremental changes rather than drastic overhauls. So let's look at what you can score that doesn't rely on the enemy, right? You have engage on all fronts, you have behind enemy lines. These are both scoreable without necessarily interacting with the enemy. And then you have raise the banners, Nephilim data, right? Those are your options for not interacting with your opponent unless you have one in your basic, like faction-based ones. So if we jump back here and we look at this table, we know that the deployment zones, let's make deployment zone lines orange, all right? So we know that the deployment zones, these are roughly 7, so we know that the deployment zones are like this, right? And again, doesn't have to be perfect. We just have to get the general concept down. So we know that that's roughly your deployment zone. It's not a lot of space. You got 10 inches deep, but it's really wide. So it's one of those where even your secondaries are going to be based around what your opponent is playing. If you're playing an opponent that doesn't have to move, you don't want to take Nephilim data, and you don't want to take, what was the other one? Engage. I mean, you could probably still take engage, but you don't want to take behind enemy lines. If they don't have to move, like a Votan army doesn't necessarily really have to move a ton. Tau armies don't necessarily have to move a ton. So if you're playing an army that can play the turtle game, you don't want to take secondaries that are going to make them play the turtle game, if that makes sense. You want to take secondaries that are going to force them to have to come out. So if you're playing a army that can turtle, I'd probably take banners, right? And the reason is because I would take banners because I can hold 2 objectives with 2 banners and still get 10 points for the game. And if my opponent doesn't come out and meet me, then they're going to have to like take objectives that keep them from interacting as well, if that makes sense. So if I'm playing an army that just wants to sit and be stagnant, I can use banners to try to push them out of their deployment zone and come meet me in the middle of the board or come meet me on the battlefield. Oop, there we go. So based on this layout, right, and I don't remember the exact measurements, but I'm pretty sure you can control this objective right here from behind this terrain feature. If not, that's not the end of the world. Even being in the terrain feature is okay because you're still getting cover. This one's not as good because you have to cross mid-board effectively to get cover. Whereas this one, you don't have to cross mid-board. So if we take banners, right, your turn 1, let's make banners blue, and let's just drop them down. You can turn 1 banners here. Oh, let's set a new layer for banners. New layer. Banners. So if you turn 1 banners here, right, you're going to have to move up here and then move here so that turn 2 you can get your banner. Now, if you have like a jump pack unit or a really fast unit, you can do that. If you have something that lets you turn 1 strategic reserves, you might be able to do that. Or if you have something that lets you come in from deep strike, ignoring ranges, you might be able to do that. Like stealth suits. I think you can bring a battle suit unit. Yeah, a scout deployment, exactly. So, and since you said that, let's talk about Marines specifically, all right? Because they're built for banners, they're built for R&D, they're built for engage. Like, these are all things that they are built for. You will have to use some of your infantry units. I know a lot of Marine players aren't a big fan of their infantry units, but that is something they are built for. Because we're going to Wait for this to load. There we go. So, and especially now that they're getting like supposedly free points upgrades, 40-point Inceptors are going to be bonkers, right? And let's see if we can find Inceptors. So if we take a 5-man squad of Inceptors, that's 200 points, right? Because they're 40 points a model. These things are going to be bonkers. And they may end up getting a points drop. I doubt it because they're already really good. So if we take R&D, for example, instead of banners, if we take R&D, they can come out, and then there's a strat, right, that lets them shoot and action. Yeah, it's 2 command points, but they get to shoot in action. So it's worth, if you have a good target that you want to shoot at and still get like your R&D or a banner down, you can do that, right? And while that might not seem really good to some players, from a person who doesn't have this interaction at all in the codex, this is really handy. Even if it's 2 command points, it's really handy. And Inceptors are really good, right? But let's go back to banners. I just wanted to bring that up real quick. So if we're doing banners and we can forward deploy, which one is it? The infiltrators that get to forward deploy? I think it is. Maybe it's not. Which guys? Incursors. Maybe it's those. I know it's one of the Phobos units. There we go. There we go. What Oh, it's concealed positions. Okay. Yep. And so incursors are 21, infiltrators are 24. So you probably want, or even scouts, I think. Do scouts still get it? Or did they go to a deep strike? They might have gone to like, nope, they've got concealed positions and outflank. So they can do either. And they're 14 points a model base. Okay? So again, they have play. Yes, they take up an elite slot now, right? But they still have play, and you don't need all 6 of those elite slots. Like, yes, they're helpful, but if you burn 2 of them for scout squads, that still leaves you 4. I think that's okay. And the new detachment isn't going to be as crippling because you're going to get bonus elite slots anyway. Sure. But you have so Marines have really good fast attacks, they have really good heavy supports, and they have really good elites, right? So if you drop 2 Redemptors, that frees up a lot of points that you can put into other things that are going to give you the same killing power. They just might not have the same staying power. A Redemptor's what, like 170, 180 points roughly? Maybe 165 and then upgrades? You can get a unit of Eradicators for that. And Eradicators are going to kill a whole lot more than that Redemptor if you play them well. And they're way more terrifying than the Redemptor. Anybody who's been across the table from a 5-man of Eradicators, like that is the first thing that they try to either avoid or get rid of. Because those boys are bonkers. Um, and then, I think Marines suffer the most in the heavy support slot though, because outside of Eradicators and I think the Sniper Boys, Eliminators, I think those are also heavy supports for whatever reason. I don't think there's a lot of really good options. Obviously, you could take Devastators, but if you take Devastators, you're going to want to put them in a drop pod. You don't have to. There's ways to kind of use them if you start with them on the table, but I feel like you get a lot more efficiency in them if you drop pod them so that you can guarantee you get to shoot at what you want. But again, we're getting way off topic here. So if we've got scouts, right, we can actually forward deploy our scouts here. Well, here, let's boop, 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 boop. So if we forward deploy a unit of scouts here and maybe like back here, and we don't want them necessarily on the terrain unless you can get them on the terrain and still not be in line of sight, right? Because you don't want, what you don't want is you don't want them here, and then your opponent who had something here can just move up and then shoot. You don't want that. You want them behind the terrain so that you can keep them out of line of sight. And then if you move your 5-man in range on your turn, and then you drop your banner, right? So we've got our banner here and our banner here. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm writing with a mouse. And then we'll have a banner here also, right? You'll have 3 banners on the table. Your first turn will have 3 banners on the table. Now, you may be playing an opponent who can kill all of those units, okay? But if we don't give them any upgrades, or if they have free upgrades, again, it doesn't really matter. If we keep them as cheap as possible, and it's a 5-man of Scout Marines, that's 70 points. So even if you lost both of them, that's 140 points, but they've put banners on the table, and you're now forcing your opponent's hand, right? So the beauty about playing against Marine players is, generally speaking, I know exactly how the game's going to go. They're going to, and we'll just go to whatever color that is. No, we want it a more vivid color. Let's go to red. Most times I play Marines, we just meet right here, right? And then the Marine players camp right there. And then I get to just do whatever I want all over the table, doing the stanky leg. And then the Marine players are mad. And again, this isn't all of them, but this has been some of them that I've played. And generally speaking, this is how the games go. They sit in the middle of the board, and then I'm able to go around and just outmaneuver, outposition, and just do what I want with them. So if I already know that that's how the game's gonna go, I'm going ahead of like I'm doing better. You never got mad though, Frank. I will say that. But our games, that is definitely how a lot of times they go when we've played, is that you try to take the middle of the board and sit in the middle of the board. And I tend to play armies that don't stay on the table, so I can't sit in the middle of the board. So my strengths are being able to come around these outsides, right? My strengths are being able to come out here and come out here and hit you in flanks. So when you just camp the middle of the board, you're playing into my strengths because I can't play the middle of the board. And a good example of that, I played a dude on stream last week, and he did win. He was playing Creations of Bile. I was playing a very melee-centric army, so I had the hard counter there. I was playing Drukari into Armor of Contempt. So it's one of those where I had a lot of uphills going against me. But he had his whole unit of Terminators in the middle of the board, and anything that wasn't in the middle of the board just died. Like, I gave him one whole side of the board. I came up the other side. Everything on that side died. And then when I did collapse in on the middle, those Terminators went away. Now, don't get me wrong. He had some possessed that kind of like flanked around here, but I let them. I was just like, I'm not messing with those right now. I'll deal with them later. You know, so uh, those were some issues that I had. Give me 1 second. Yeah, fair. And that's it. Is you designed your army for that. But like I said, like for me, when I see that, I'm licking my lips because this is playing into my strengths. This is telling me, okay, you're going to do exactly what I want you to do and exactly what most Marine players do. And because of that, I'm going to be able to maneuver in position and go where I want to go and do what I want to do. So let's get rid of some of this. So if we've got these two banners, right? Most armies, not all, but most armies aren't going to be able to clear out both of these units, right? Obviously, there's some exceptions. Exceptionally shooty Marine armies, exceptionally shooty armies like Votan or Tau are going to be able to come up and clear them off the objectives. But only Tau are really going to be able to come up and take the objective and clear you off the objective. But that's where you do this, okay? So you've got these banners here. Let's go back to our blue. You've dropped your banners, right? So what you want to do is, let's say you've got some blade guard, right? You want to take your blade guard and you want to position them right in here. Behind this first floor blocking wall. Let's outline this in black real quick so we can actually see where it's at. So we've got this wall here. You want to keep your blade guard behind it. So that way when your opponent comes up here, right, because they are, let's make our opponent, let's go back to red. Opponents will be red. So when your opponent decides he wants to come up here, and even if it's Tau, let's say they come all the way up. So they can take the objective, they can wipe you off of it, right? You now have a hard-hitting melee unit right here. Boop. Let's go back to our blue. So you've got this unit right here. So if they end up taking that and they knock you off that objective and then they take away your banner, you want like Vanguard Vets or Blade Guard or just something that really hits hard, just perched right in here, because you're going to be able to move your 6 inches, right? And then you're going to be able to charge. And then in addition to that, if you've got a shooting unit that you can keep back here as well, you can just kind of laterally move them here and then have lanes of fire into them, and then your charge lane here, right? That way you can soften it up if it's a unit that could do a lot of devastating overwatch, like if it's a crisis suit unit, you can soften them up with something. You can really just lean hard into wiping them. Because again, if we're keeping with the Tau, if they've got that there, and especially with crisis suits getting ready to go up in points, you're going to see even less breachers, even less fire warriors, and even less Kroot. Because Kroot are going up 1 point, according to the rumors. Crisis suits are going up 5 points. So if Kroot are going up a point and crisis suits are going up 5, you're going to see less breachers. So they're only going to have extra killa units to come wipe you off the objective. If they don't send a killa unit, your scouts can probably handle them, or at least stay alive long enough to not die, right? So if they don't take the time to dedicate to getting rid of them, you're either going to keep the objective or they're going to be standing there in front of you and you still have scouts, right? Neither one of those are a losing scenario. And if scouts get free upgrades, I'd consider just giving them all some sort of heavy weapon like heavy bolters. Because again, they're not amazing, but if they're free and they're 14 points a model, if you've got, I don't, let's look, because I don't remember how many heavy bolters you can take in a scout squad. Because I don't remember if it's everybody gets a heavy weapon or if it's one dude. Scout sergeant can get some bullshit. One scout's bolt gun can be replaced with a heavy bolter, missile launcher, or weapon from the special weapons list. Okay, so only one dude can take a heavy bolter. Is that right? Frank, you're a Marine player. Is that right? Only one dude can take a heavy weapon or special weapon? Okay. And then they can all get the camo cloak. Again, if they're free, which it sounds like they're going to be, is an auto include because they're 14 points a model and they'll have a 2-up save and cover, right? So that, again, auto include. And it might be worth anyway. Who knows? But yeah, okay, so if we take even just a heavy bolter or a missile launcher or just something to kind of like, I have a gun that's going to throw dice and do some damage, even a plasma gun is worth, right? Boop. You're going to have this shooting here. And then as far as this flanking shooting unit here, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be eradicators, it could be inceptors, it could be devastators, it could be like one of the cheapest shooting units you have. It could even be like a 5-man with the auto bolters that throw a lot of dice. Because again, worst case scenario, you're going to kill some drones. Best case scenario, you spike your rolls and your opponent rolls poorly and you don't. Plus, you're going to be in the tactical doctrine by turn 2 when you sidestep out to counter shoot, and that's going to put you at neg 1. And that's going to be what separates like good players from average players from poor players. Um, not that I'm like a top tier player. I have no idea where I rank. Like I know I'm good at the game, but I don't know how I would rank playing like some of the best players in the game. That being said, I generally know what I'm going to do throughout the course of the game, at least 2 turns ahead. And I generally know what you're going to do, especially if I've played you a couple times. I generally know what you're going to do at least a turn or two ahead. There have been times, and a good example, like there have been times I've played Tyler, and while playing Tyler, he's moved something, and I've just been like, why are you doing that? And he'd be like, well, and I'm like, look, you're going to move that here, and then you're going to want to do this, and then do this, and then move this, and then push this here. And walked him through the next like 2 turns. And I'm like, and that's not going to work. And he's just been like, no, no. And then, yes, that's what he was going to do. So again, it's just one of those where it's repetition. You got to kind of think about how you're doing things at least a turn ahead, because your opponent's going to do whatever they're going to do, and that's fine. But if you understand how to play your army or move or maneuver your army, that can dictate what your opponent does. You can push them to do what you want. So that's why, like I said, like if we drop this and this, they're either going to have to react to this banner or both. Okay? So let's clear some of this noise out. And let's say so what I like to do, okay, is I like to cut the board in half. So let's cut this board in half. We're still on banners, right? We haven't even moved off of banners. So we're going to cut this board in half. Beep. Close enough. So what I tend to do is I tend to play half the board at a time. And that is something I picked up from playing Craft Worlds Eldar and Drukhari. Because as an orc player, like I can flood the table and generally still have units, even if I'm losing units really fast. So I can flood the table, and it's just a lot to chew through. But when I tried like that, my first game with Craft Worlds, I tried doing that, and everything just evaporated, and I was basically tabled in 2 turns, and I was just mad at myself, right? Because like, man, how did I do that? But since then, I've started doing this, and I even do it with my orcs now, and it's worked a lot better. So you can even just put scouts here with the intent of everything on this side, right? With everything over here, you can move with the intent of just taking this side and leaving this one empty, this other one. And then if you have a redeploy strat or a redeploy warlord trait, you can actually use that to fake your opponent out. You can deploy super heavy on one side, put your scouts here. Let's put an S here for scouts, and your scouts here. And then let's go ahead and erase this. Boop. boop, 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 boop. And there we go. So you can put your scouts and your scouts there, right? And if you've got scouts here and scouts here, but you deploy super heavy on this side right here, if you've got a redeploy, even if it only lets you move 3 units, it doesn't matter. 3 units is a lot. And not only can you redeploy 3 units, you could redeploy any of your 3 units. So you could like move scouts. You can, and I don't know. I know Marines have a redeploy, but I think it might be faction locked, but I wouldn't swear to it. So you can redeploy. So you can use your deployment. You can intentionally deploy super heavy on one side, and if it looks like your opponent takes that bait, you can just not redeploy and go. And if it looks like your opponent doesn't take that bait, you can move things around to just kind of more evenly balance your deployment. And you can even leave something in the open intentionally to see if they take the bait, or if you know you have a redeploy, you can slap something like right in their face. So if you have like an Invictor Warsuit, I know they're not good. I get that, right? I do. So let's jump to this so we're not. You could put that Invictor Warsuit like right here, knowing that if you go first, you get to redeploy. I know Raven Guard have some kind of redeploy. I don't know if anybody else does. But at that point, it may be worth, to be a Raven Guard successor chapter. I don't remember what their super doctrine is. I think it's kind of poopy. I know their chapter tactics aren't great. But again, uh, having that redeploy is super useful because you can just put things right up front and then be like, okay, well, I didn't go first, so I'm going to go ahead and move this warsuit back and protect it, or move it, so, whatever. You get what I'm saying. So you use your banners, like I said, to kind of fish for your turtley armies to try to get them to move out. And that I learned from a gentleman named Sean. He's a Sisters player, has been for a long time. And watching him play against Tau, like that's what he did. Is he basically took objectives where he didn't have to interact, and not all armies have that ability, and I get that. But he took objectives where he didn't have to interact with his opponent, like banners. One of the sisters ones where he can just kind of like use miracle dice, and he would just like advance every turn and use a miracle die. So he was just getting points by just doing nothing. And what that did for him was it made his opponent have to come out and play. Because that's one of the most infuriating things about playing against Tau is that they don't have to, right, uh, leave their deployment zone. Like a well-built Tau list can still table you in 2 to 3 shooting phases. So they only really need to play 2 or 3 turns of the game. So if they want to, they can just sit there and force you to come to them and then pounce on you, right? So you just want to be able to kind of counter that. And that's where banners comes in. Now, if you're playing an army that doesn't turtle, I don't know why I did that. All right, we're just going ham. Bam, 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 bam. There we go. So if we're playing an army that doesn't turtle, right? So if we're playing like an orc army or a melee-centric Eldar army, and even the shooting armies are still going to be mobile for Eldar. Drukhari are going to be really mobile, but they can't sit. They have to keep moving. Um, a lot of Marine armies aren't super turtly, again, unless they're the shooty kind. Like Dark Angels builds tend to be a bit turtly, but they're so slow that they're not getting anywhere. And that's okay. You can work around that. But if you're playing a very mobile army, right, or even just one that has to come to you, like a Blood Angels or like a melee-centric Eldar or a Drukhari or Orcs or something that just needs to get into combat to be interactive, Then I think you take R&D, and then I think you honestly take you could take behind enemy lines. I mean, you could also do engage. Engage is fine. The only reason I don't like engage is that you can literally only ever get 15 points on it, right? And I get that you can only get 15 points on any of them, but like with behind enemy lines, you only need to have 2 units in their deployment zone for 3 turns to get 12, right? It's one of those where if theoretically you could get 20 points on it if it didn't cap at 15. So there's a lot more room for error. There's a lot more room for positioning. There's a lot more room for kind of, if I missed a turn or I only got 1 unit 1 turn, it's not the end of the world. And that's why I think, to me, behind enemy lines, especially, again, we're going to focus on Marines for today, just because we got Frank here, who's a Marine player. A couple of the other people that have been in and out of the video so far have been Marine players. I just know some of the names. So we're just going to focus on that. Plus, a lot of people play Marines, right? So if you take behind enemy lines, now they have a Phobos strat that lets them redeploy. Let's take a look at that. And redeploy is not the right word. But it's not like a the jump either. And these aren't Phobos, so they won't have it. I have to see what it's called. Yep, it does put them into reserves. I'm just trying to see. I don't remember what it's called. Guerrilla warfare. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Guerrilla tactics. I bet that's it. Use this stratagem in your movement phase when a Phobos unit from your army is more than 6 inches from any enemy models is selected to move. You put it into strategic reserves. And it can't come back this turn. So you use it in your movement phase. They have to wait 1 battle round and then they come in. Awesome. So here's how I would approach that. If we're running a battalion, right? Oh, let's go here. All right, so if we're running a battalion and we're still on this same mission, I'm going to have a unit of infiltrators here. That's the eraser. That's not going to do a dang thing. We're going to have a unit of infiltrators. All right, let's turn this opacity up. Unit of infiltrators here, a unit of infiltrators here. Okay, because I think, and then maybe like a unit of assault intercessors. So let's mark these with an I. And they don't have to be infiltrators. You want at least one squad to be. They could be intercessors. They could be assault intercessors. One squad you need to be infiltrators, I think. Okay. And then I think you put a unit of, like I said, assault intercessors, heavy intercessors, some kind of unit for leaving in the back on your objective, because you do still have this objective right here, right? But you need them 6 inches in, and you put them here. Because what you're going to do, right, is turn 1, you're going to R&D with this unit, and then this unit's going to go back into strategic reserves for 1 command point. Now, the reason you do that is because this unit that you just put into strategic reserves no longer has a time limit for when it has to come out. If a unit starts the table on the board, they don't have to come out by turn 3. Now, if they don't come out by the end of the game, they're counted as destroyed, but they no longer have that you have to come out by turn 3 or you dead, right? Uh, if they start in strategic reserves, then they have to be deployed by turn 3. If they start on the table, they can go into strategic reserves and they can stay there for as long as you need them to. So what you do is you R&D with these lads, right? Or with the heavy intercessors or assault intercessors, whatever here, and then you spend 1 to pick them up. And I would even consider infiltrators just because of the 12-inch no deep strike bubble, because you're going to want that depending on who you're playing against. But it's not necessary. It's just a handy utility thing to have. Now, turn 2, if your opponent has left an opening, although in turn 2 you can't come into their deployment zone, right? So you don't want to do anything turn 2 unless you have a deep strike unit that can also come down, but we'll get into that. So if you have actually, let's start now. Let's say you've got some Inceptors, right? If you've got some Inceptors, like a 5-man unit of Inceptors, and your opponent leaves you like a corner like this, or here, and any place you can put those guys where they can shoot something that you need them to shoot and still do R&D, then you put them down turn 2, you spend the 2 CP to shoot, and you do the R&D. Like, that's it. That's where you do it, because these are going to be the hardest quarters to get, depending on who and what you're playing. So if they leave you a pocket on their table side, turn 2, you take that pocket if you get to R&D and shoot, or if you get to R&D and not have to worry about counter charges or counter shots, right? Like, if they've just pushed so far out of that corner that you can just go there and score points, then you go there and you score the points. If they haven't, right, you keep everything up until turn 3 and you R&D here, right? You get that one done. Because when you're playing a generally melee-centric army, or against one, I should say, by turn 3, they should have most of their deployment zone emptied. And even if they don't, they should at least have enough of space cleared that you can start dropping units in. And turn 3, you can go into your enemy's deployment zone, but you can't be within 6 inches of their table edge with strategic reserves, right? So we know this orange line's 10 inches, which means you could get maybe like here. So if you can fit all 5 of your incursors or infiltrators or whatever into this little brick here, they can get into that corner and they can R&D, and because they're troops, they're going to automatically get it. You know, so again, you go into it with a plan, and if you can get it 3 times, that's 8 points. And while 8 points isn't 12 points for capping it, it's better than no points, right? If you've got a bad interaction with secondaries, this is how you make sure you're at least scoring points. This is how you make sure that you're getting your secondaries. And so now, also, if by turn 2 or turn 3 we can get 2 units like here and here, we can do 1 R&D and we can have 2 units for behind enemy lines. And then again, what you want to do is because you can only do 1 R&D per turn, you want to put the Inceptors, if you've got those in Deep Strike, whatever you have in Deep Strike, because you're going to want Deep Striking units in order to do this. You need redeploys like the Guerrilla Tactics or Deep Strikers to make sure that you can continue to do R&D, right? So if they're Inceptors, which is what I would use, like that, they're expensive. It's 200 points, but if you give them the plasma, like, that's a lot of killing power. It's 2 D3 plasma shots each, and you don't need to supercharge it. Like, supercharging is nice to do, but it's not mandatory, right? So it's one of those where just putting out an average of 4 shots per guy times 5 guys is still 20 dice. Hitting on 3s, you're going to average about 14 to 15 hits. So unless you're hitting something, if you're hitting something T7 like a Redemptor, you're still going to average 7 wounds. And those are -3, which means they're going to fail on average about 6 of them. So you're going to do 6 damage to a Redemptor with those guys on average when you shoot them. And that's just quick math. It's not exact, but it's pretty accurate. So it's one of those where if they leave you that opening and you can shoot something spicy, you take it. Especially if you can get it in their deployment zone to score points, right? So this is going to be against armies that do need to leave their deployment zone. So again, if they don't need to leave their deployment zone, you take banners. If they do need to leave their deployment zone, you take R&D. I think that's how you do it. Now, and we just talked about behind enemy lines, and I think you take behind enemy lines when you do banners, and I think you take what's the other one I just said? I guess we're gonna have to go look because I don't remember. Oh, engage. And again, so you can take engage. I don't think engage is that great, especially because it's been continuously tweaked. First, it was like you had to do this. Now it's that. You have to be 6 inches inside the quarter, and then in addition to 6 inches inside the quarter, you need to be you had to have a starting strength of 3 or more models. So I understand the starting strength. That one makes sense because, people were taking lictors and just being like, ah, I'll score engage. Haha, I have this one lictor and you can't even shoot it now. So I get why that changed, but I think 3 inches inside the quarter is a better interaction than 6 for engage, just because, again, like 6 inches is pretty rough, and it's not a secondary that you can get a lot of points on. You have to have all 4 quarters for 4 or 5 turns to just cap it, right? Because 3 times 5 is 15. So the other thing maybe is if they keep it the way they do, you score 4 points for all 4 quarters and then 2 points for 3 quarters. So that, like, if you miss 4 quarters one turn, you could still make it up, if that makes sense. And I don't know, maybe it's better than I think it is because maybe just the people I play against, it's not a great one. Um, but that's just my opinion on it. And then again, if we're going to talk Marines, we'll look at the Marine secondaries in just a minute. But let's look at your Warpcraft, right? And I know they're not worth for Marines. I do agree with that. Like, your librarians have good spells, and you can't give up casting in order to do this action. I don't disagree with that. So what I would consider doing, right, is if you have the extra points to do it, and I'm sure we could squeeze it in, and I don't know if it's in here. Well, that's where we're getting ready to talk right now, my man. And that is pretty cheap for a second spellcaster. 60 points is cheaper than a weird boy. And he's got better ballistic skill, the same weapon skill, the same number of attacks, a better save, and better movement, and better weapons outside of the staff. Like, the force staff is like strength 7, neg 1, 2 damage, or D3 damage. Yeah, if it's a Inferno pistol, I probably wouldn't, because those have a 6-inch range, right? Yeah, I would probably not spend the 5 points on him to do damage. I'd probably just bring him with the intent of doing Psychic Interrogation or Warp Ritual. And then if he does something else, cool. Like, I'm not going to get worked up about it. But I'm trying to find his spells. Here we go. Because I remember his spells aren't, like, the best, right? -1 leadership. Okay, so this one, Terrify. 100% worth, depending on what you're playing. Because of that can't fire Overwatch trigger, right? Shooty armies do exist. Imagine if somebody casted that on a unit in your Iron Hands list, Frank. Because while your Iron Hands don't necessarily devastate an Overwatch, the fact that you could potentially Overwatch on 4s, if I have a spell where I can just shut that down and be like, nah, you're not doing it, that makes my charges and my fight phase a lot less stressful. Auto pass morale. I feel like that's better for like a guard unit, right? Because Marines generally don't interact too much with the leadership phase. Dominate. So dominate's funny, but I don't think it's worth taking. Like it's hilarious, and it could be one that if you get it to work, could be pretty devastating. Um, so your next one, resolving an attack made by an enemy model. Mental interrogation is meh, right? Like you can make an enemy character -1 to hit, although rolling 3d6 and getting higher than their leadership and getting a command point might be worth. And again, just as I'm going to take this in case I can't do a psychic interrogation or a warp ritual or whatever. That's all. Like, you're not leaning on these spells to do anything. And then castigation's just like a smite. Scourging is actually pretty solid. You have to be real close. So again, not necessarily something you want to have happen, but you reduce their attacks. Excuse me, reduce their attacks by 1. What's the psychic veil? Yeah, whatever. And warding incantation is actually, so that's honestly probably what I would take, because it's a pick a unit, infantry or biker, and that unit gets a 5-up invuln. Especially with losing armor of contempt, like I would probably take that, and then if I can't do my secondary, I can at least give something an invulnerable save, and move on with my life. Right? Seems reasonable. And for 60 points, I feel like this is solid. And then if you go into an army that is going to shut you down, like if you hit a Grey Knights and you know they're just going to shut down your psychic secondaries, then you just find a different secondary to take. And then if he gets to interact with the game, great. Because the downside to this is if you do hit those armies like a Grey Knights, um, they're just going to turn off your casting, you know. So you don't want your points to be tied up there, but that's a very limited interaction. That's not something you're going to hit a lot. So I would consider taking one of these lads, not this lad. Oh, I guess I closed him out. Anyway, I would consider taking an Inquisitor. They're cheap. You can spare 60 points to bring an Inquisitor. You might have to eschew something somewhere else, but again, with so many points drops coming to Marines, I feel like this is basically like almost to an auto include, just to have a cheap caster that maybe gives somebody an invuln save and maybe scores you some points, right? And what that does though is like with the caster and the other thing we were just talking about, like R&D or banners, like leaning into shadow ops, like R&D and banners, and then leaning into the warp ritual. What that does is that gives you 2 secondaries that you're like, okay, I should be able to score 9 to 12 points, 8 to 12 points on these 2 secondaries. So that gives me, let's say, an average of 20 points right there. In addition to that, I should be able to score 30 to 35 in primaries, right? If we go back here and we cut this board in half, you need to control 2 for 10. And if you do that for 4 turns, you actually score 40 points. So that's assuming you don't score any of the bonus primaries and you don't control 3 or more or 2 or more, right? Like if my opponent scores 1, like if I'm playing a turtley opponent, they might only hold 1 objective for the first 2 turns. So I'm getting extra points. So you should be able to get 30 to 40 points in primaries if you play half the board and play smart. So what you do is you play your half the board. You bank on getting your 30, let's call it 35. We'll split the difference, even though you should never split the difference, as they say. You get your 35. Assume you're going to get your 20 from those. That takes you to 55. Your army's painted. That takes you to 65. You now just need to get 10 points in another secondary, and you've hit 75 points. Is that enough to win? Maybe. But I think it's a lot better than a lot of Marine players are doing right now anyway. And I think Marines have a really good interaction in primaries. I think the biggest issue is what we talked about earlier is that we're just camping the middle of the board, right? We take oaths, we take this, we take that, and we camp the middle of the board. Now, if we couple that with weep, I just want to do secondaries real quick. We're going to run through just the base secondaries for Marines. We're not going to worry about all the faction specific ones, right? Because my understanding is these are kind of bad. Codex warfare. Also, again, if indeed doctrines are stacking, this may be a lot better. At the end of the battle, score victory points as follows. Score 2 victory points for each enemy unit that was destroyed as the result of an attack made with a heavier grenade weapon while the Devastator doctrine was active for your army. So there is a rumor that your doctrines are still progressive, but they accumulate rather than one at a time. So once your Devastator doctrine's active, it's active for the whole game. Now, this is unconfirmed, and we don't know. This was just one of the rumors. But if this is true, Codex Warfare just became a very viable and very good secondary rather than being very bad. Right, because you can't just spend 2 command points, make one of your units in that doctrine, and then score points. I agree with you. I think that it should be for the unit, not for the army. The downside to that, though, is that there's so many armies that can manipulate your doctrines that it would get abused and become one of those secondaries where it's like, okay, you're just getting 15 points. Um, so it's kind of an interesting give and take. I agree though that the for your army clause is what makes it bad. And if doctrines do indeed stack like we are seeing, yeah, and those are my understanding is those are getting nerfed, and so the sisters especially are gonna get hit hard. It looks like, but in an indirect way, like losing armor of contempt. And then also getting points raises, and then also getting some secondary reworks is going to put sisters in a very precarious spot. Uh, Necrons, from what I've seen, are only getting secondary reworks. They're not really getting much else, which probably puts them in a better spot. Uh, I just wish, a little aside, I would just like to see some Necron players play something that isn't just a copy paste Necron list. Stop telling me your army's bad if you're not going to play anything other than what everybody else is playing. Like, stop it. But anyway, my little digression, right? You score 1 victory point for each enemy unit that was killed by rapid fire assault, and then 1 victory point for each. So again, I think this one, if doctrines do indeed stack, becomes very good. I think this one is very hard, and while it's flavorful and it's cool, and I like seeing these types of secondaries from a tournament play competitive aspect, I 100% agree it is not worth taking. Um, It is super flavorful, which I like. I love these flavorful style secondaries, and if everybody's secondaries interacted in this like flavorful and meaningful way, the game would be a lot better, right? That's where I stand on it. Oaths is real weird. You score 1 victory point if a character vehicle or monster unit was destroyed by one of yours. You score 1 victory point if you didn't fail a morale test or fall back, and then you score 1 victory point if you have a unit wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield. Okay, so I think this objective is only worth a shit if there's an objective in the middle of the battlefield. And that's it. And then if you're taking the Inquisitor, I think you put the Inquisitor in the middle of the battlefield, you try to get your Warp Ritual, you try to fish for your oaths, and you move on with your life. And I don't disagree with that at all. I think it needs to go back to 2 points as well. I don't know why it ever went to 1. Or I would even argue, even if it stays at 1, get an additional 1 or 2 points if you do all 3, right? Like if you get 1 point for each, that's fine. But if you manage to do all 3, get an additional 1 or 2 points. Like that shit's hard, okay? Because there's gonna be turns where you don't kill a character, vehicle, or monster unit. And there's going to be turns maybe where you have to fall back, but it might be worth to say you score 5 points if you do all 3. It's 1 point each, but you score 5 for all 3. To me, that would be a good interaction as well. The downside to that, no, I don't see a downside to that. Never mind. But O's is one of those where, again, you're playing into that trap of I have to be in the middle of the board, which is what a lot of Marine players do. And so it allows players like me who tend to play the flanks a lot more to get to do what I want to do anyway. Uh, and again, shock tactics. I don't know that I would take shock tactics over behind enemy lines depending on the build and depending on your opponent. But shock tactics, I've already said this before, this thing is really good. It just requires finesse and it requires understanding how to play. And there's going to be some games and some armies where you just don't score many into it. Like, if I know you take shock tactics, I might take a hit on my primaries just to keep you from scoring shock tactics, right? Because that's, yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely worth. Um, and that's the thing with secondaries is generally speaking, you're going to have probably for most armies, you're going to have like 2 secondaries where you're like 80% of the games I can pick these 2. These are my security blanket. You're always going to not always, you're usually going to have that one-off secondary where you're like I don't know what I'm going to take, but if I'm playing an orc buggy spam list, at least it's open for bring it down. If I'm playing like GSC with 5 characters, I can take assassinate. Like you get these options, right? And that's pretty cool. That's really neat. So, and that to me is how the game should be. You should have maybe 2 secondaries that are going to work maybe 70 to 80% of the time. You're going to be fishing for that third one, rather than just like having 3 that you come in and you score. But I think shock tactics is really good, and it stacks well with some of the other things we've talked about, right? It's just going to require that finesse and it's going to require that thinking, that planning. You're going to need to not take objectives as quickly and you're going to need to push up a little slower rather than just try and take them all early. We got a little bit of time, so I think I might dive into a few of the. We'll close that one out. Let's do Dark Angels. Let's do Iron Hands. And let's do White Scars because I like them. They're funny. Let's see if this is anything important real quick. Boop, 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 boop. Gotcha. Okay. So Dark Angels are interesting, right? And maybe we just focus. Let's just run through Dark Angels and see how that goes. Because it might be time after that. Select this objective during the pre-resolve. select one character from your opponent's army. At the end of the battle, you score 3 for killing it. You score 3 if it was killed by a melee attack. You score another 3 if it was by Inner Circle or Deathwing. And you score 6 if the unit that killed it wasn't destroyed. That's solid. I wouldn't say it's great. It's one of those where maybe if you don't have something better, it's worth. Because again, if you've got a character, and I know, so it's really good into melee armies, right? Like, hey, I know your war bosses or Cowboy Larry. That's true. And we're gonna get into that, but it's also 12 if it's not a Deathwing unit and they live, right? So you could kill it with not a Deathwing unit, right? If you've got like a knob on Smash a Squig or like some sort of Smash Chaplain who's only kitted out to do one thing, I'm going to pick that character. I'm not going to pick one that's buffing your army, right? Because support characters don't need to get into the thick, but melee characters do. So, like, if you've got a knob on Smash a Squig and he's got Brutal but Cunning and Ed Wappa's Kill Choppa, you're just playing, like, turn the card sideways and attack, right? Uh, and I'm going to let that happen. I'm going to let it happen because I'm going to score points when I kill it. And if you play keep away with your knob on Smash a Squig, for example, I'm winning. Because while that dude isn't necessarily, he's very disruptive. Exactly. Like for those that haven't played against the knob on Smash a Squig with that combo, that lad is very disruptive. And he hits way above his weight class if he can get into combat. He absolutely slams above his weight class. Like I've done 15 to 18 damage into a full grown, like the big knights. I've gotten some spicy dice and one shot a 5-man of Scarab Terminators. So it's one of those where he hits incredibly hard for as cheap as he is, which is why he's in a lot of work lists now. He wasn't early on, but he is now. And that's why, is just because he hits above his weight class. Now, he does require good positioning and finesse because he's still only T6 6 wounds with a 4-up save, right? He doesn't stay on the table super long. A lot of times, he'll kill a unit and then go away. So you got to kind of play that Eldar trade game. But if your plan is to kill me in melee to score points, right? If I'm playing this knob on Smash a Squig or this Smash Chaplain, and you're like, well, if that guy dies in melee, I'm just getting 12 points, right? If my unit lives. If that pushes me to stay out of combat, just like Frank said, that's still a win. Like your unit that's hitting above its weight class is no longer interacting with the game in a meaningful way. And if it does, and I can kill it, I'm scoring points. So it's one of those where that's how you got to kind of look at that. Again, I think Dark Angels have play. I think the thing that Dark Angels players in general suffer from is they get so hung up on I have to have Ravenwing or I have to have Deathwing and I'm just literally going to run 30 Terminators or 30 bikes and there's no room for anything else, right? Death on the Wind, you score 2 victory points each time a unit in this an enemy unit is destroyed by a Ravenwing model from your army that moved 12 inches or more during the movement phase of that turn or made a charge move that turn. I agree. I think Green Wing is very underrated. I'm not a Dark Angels player. I'm obviously not even a Space Marine player. But when you can have infantry that get to shoot while they're engaged, that's a win. Uh, and again, and I think you and I might have even had this talk. It was either you and me or Bailey and I, because it was like, oh, well, everything just dies when it gets charged. Well, fucking charge it then. Like Stop letting your opponent dictate what gets into combat and start making the charges yourself so that you can dictate what gets into combat. Um, this one's solid. I don't think it's amazing. I think this one is why you see, oh, I've got to have Deathwing. Yes. Yeah, and that was it. And Bailey's been out of the game for about a year. He took a year off to focus on some Napoleonics and stuff. Um, but I think Death on the Wind is why you see like such. I need Raven Wing. I need Deathwing for like one of the other secondaries, and you don't see like a mix wing. And again, I just think that's silly. But again, um, I think martial interdiction into some armies is an auto take, and it's a purge the enemy, right? So if they don't have a bring it down, and they only have a couple of characters, and one of them is just like a I'm coming at you 100 miles an hour character, I think you take martial interdiction and you pick that character, and I think that's what you do. You know, you don't pick support characters that they can hide and still have them be useful. Death on the Wind, Warpcraft, nothing there. Stubborn Defiance. In your command phase, select one objective marker that is not within your deployment zone. At the end of each command phase, if you control that objective marker and a Dark Angels unit from your army. Oh, hold up. So I think my buddy Kyle's been playing this wrong based off of what I'm reading, and I think he's been hamstringing himself with it. In your first command phase, select one objective marker that is not within your deployment zone. At the end of each of your command phases, if you control that objective marker with a Dark Angels unit from your army with the OBSEC ability, score a number of victory points based on the consecutive number of phases you have controlled that objective marker for and had that unit within range of it as follows. Let's look at the example. If at the end of the third command phase, if you have controlled the selected objective marker for 3 of your command phases consecutively, and the same Dark Angels unit with OBSEC was within range of that objective marker at the end of each of those command phases, you score 3 victory points from the secondary. If you Okay, I need to reread this because this seems weird. If you control that objective marker and a Dark Angels, not one, a. So you could do this with the way I'm interpreting this, and I will have to reach out to some of my buddies that do TOs and the GW judges, because the way I'm understanding it, you could do this with multiple units. I see nothing that says one unit, right? I see nothing that stipulates that it has to be one OBSEC unit. So I see nothing that says you couldn't stack it, which is why I need to reach out to my TO buddies and my buddies that do the Games Workshop judging. Because that is how I'm interpreting that, right? And right, and if you have 2 units for 1 turn with OBSEC on the same objective, the way I'm reading it is you would score 2 points. You'd get 1 point for each unit. Right. Okay. That's how I interpret that too. I think my buddy Kyle's been playing that wrong, and I think he's been making it harder for himself. And also, the other thing is, every time I see this, yeah, I'm gonna double check, for sure. Every time I see this, I only see one unit, right? One unit. I'm gonna plant my 10 Deathwing Terminators here, and then I'm gonna just die on this hill. Uh, that is how I see that played. However, I know Marines have an ability to give characters OBSEC. I know they do. And so I personally think it would be better to have a support character who can camp that objective with some kind of hard to kill vehicle, right? Like a Redemptor or even a Venerable Dreadnought, because the Venerables have the feel no pain. Something to camp that objective, screen the character. The character can score the points because he's OBSEC, and then you just have to replace your screening units, right? That's it. And that's probably how I would approach that rather than here's my brick of 10 Terminators. Because when that brick of 10 Terminators dies, that's like 400 to 500 points of your army. And it will die. Like, they will. I was learning how to clear them out with 8th edition Chaos Space Marines when they were the hotness in 9th edition, right? So it's like, if I can clear them out with 8th edition Chaos Space Marines, clearly the 9th edition books are still going to be able to clear them out. And then once they die, you can still come back with a new unit and keep scoring it. So to me, Stubborn Defiance is just an auto take for Dark Angels, period. There are going to be some missions you don't want it, and there's going to be some matchups you probably don't want it. But again, I think this becomes that 80% of the time, you can rely on this to score you 10 points. And that seems pretty solid. All right. I think this is where we're going to call it. I've got to do some editing, and I've got to export to YouTube with a couple of videos today. I had a really interesting time talking about secondary objectives. I think this was a really cool discussion, and getting the map out and kind of drawing some things out was kind of fun. So maybe we'll do a little bit more like that, or maybe I'll just take it down onto the table and actually move units while we talk. The downside to that is that I can't monitor the chat as easily, so I'll have to get that figured out. I may have to just pull it up on my phone and then have my phone right there so that I can see the chat and interact with people. So maybe the next time we do this, that's what we'll do. So again, everybody that watched, I appreciate you. Feel free. I'm just a burping machine today. Don't forget to check out the Teespring store. And Friday, we are going to talk about Big Mechs and Mega Armor. I've got a video going up on YouTube, and that's basically going to be a live stream version of that video. And outside of that, I think we're all good. Thanks.